Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, welcome back to Better Sex. This is Jessa. I'm so glad you're choosing to spend some time with me in my show. I am always looking for topics that will be helpful to you in creating your best possible sex life with your partner in terms of issues around sexuality and intimacy and relationship. But every once in a while, I go in a little bit of a different direction, still related to sex and sexuality, but maybe not quite so much about your own relationship. And this is one of these shows. Today, we're going to be talking about LGBTQ plus youth, your kids, potentially, who are somewhere in the sexual minority community, and specifically the school environment, and how important it is that they are in a safe place, that they feel safe at school for their own learning and for their own thriving, I guess I would say. So we're going to be talking about LGBTQ youth and specifically what schools can be doing, should be doing to best meet their needs, what you can do as a parent, potentially, if your child has come out to you, if you're adapting to these identities they might have, and if you need to advocate on their behalf in the school system. My guest today is Michelle Belke, and she's a social worker and a sex therapist. She works full-time right now as a school counselor, which is why this is so dear to her, and also has a private practice as a sex therapist in Michigan. We actually did our sex therapy training together, so I've known Michelle for a really long time, and I'm just delighted that she's here to share her expertise. Hope you enjoyed the show. Michelle, thank you so much for being with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is a bit of a detour in terms of my topics, because it isn't so much about couples and their own sex life, but I still think it's really, really important to talk about.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's start with just sort of, I'm going to ask you to sort of introduce yourself a little bit and talk about how you work with LGBTQ youth.
Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I am a clinical social worker by training. So I got my master's degree in social work, and then I went on to do more in-depth training in therapy. So I did a fellowship where I worked with adults and adolescents and youth in a variety of mental health concerns. And through that work, through that training, I realized that my passion was working in the realm of sexual health. Right now, I work full-time as a school counselor in an independent school in the state of Michigan. So I really work a lot with the LGBTQ plus youth within our school setting. And then I've also kind of geared my private practice that I run on the side as a part-time process, and I work with a lot of youth as well, LGBTQ plus youth in my private practice.
Okay. So how much of your work in the school setting is geared towards sexual minority concerns? I mean, it seems to me that would just be a little fraction of what you would do.
Yeah. It's actually a lot of the work that I do within the school setting, and I don't know really what. I think part of that is because I've been really open with the students, and I think that's part of my approach as a counselor, is that I let them know, that I'm there for them, and I'm comfortable in the topic of sexual health and sexual identity and gender, and I show that in my office space. I reach out and do a lot of outreach within the school. So recently, the school that I'm in, there was no GSA up until that point about a year ago. And a couple of the students approached me, and we worked together to create one within the school setting. So I'm also involved in areas like that within the school. So it really, I would say, a lot. Most of my work actually has to do around working with students who are sexual minorities, students or gender students.
And when you say, maybe you could define that for the listeners, what's a GSA that the school didn't have and that you wanted to develop?
Yeah, so it's a Gay Straight Alliance, and so we're not an official GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance. So the research out there really shows that students who identify LGBTQ plus students, they don't feel as safe within their school setting. There's higher risk of violence. There's higher suicide rates, especially transgendered students. And having a GSA, having a support within this larger community is huge for increasing that feeling of safety within the school setting. So it really was student-led. It was student-driven, which is how it should be. I always push for students to self-advocate, and I'm there kind of supporting them as they go through the process. But, we are, it's also in a school setting where it's an independent school. So it is more conservative, and it's harder. It's not necessarily as easy maybe in other school settings. I will say that, to create a GSA. And so the students really had to come together and they had to meet in person with administration to share with that administrator why it's important to create a space like this. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions too around what is a GSA? What is this Gay Straight Alliance? Are we talking about sex all the time in this space? And no, it's not that at all. This is a space that's safe. It's a designated safe space within the school setting that makes school feel safer to these students.
Now, maybe it's a matter of geography, but I'm surprised to hear you say that as a independent school, it's more conservative. Because I'm out in Seattle, so maybe it's a different thing, or maybe it depends on different schools, but it seems to me like the public schools have so many restrictions and have to be, they seem more conservative to me, but maybe it's different in Michigan.
Yeah, in my experience in talking with colleagues at other schools, at public schools, I have a good colleague that's at a public school. GSAs are just part of life, in public schools. And again, up until this point, this past year, they created a group. So their GSA, their name for it is SAGA, Sexuality and Gender Acceptance is the name that they came up with and created. But this was the first time there had really been a named club like this in the history of the school.
Wow. So how do you handle working with the youth in the school that are struggling with their own families? I'm imagining that's one of the topics that they're, have they come out to their parents? Are they accepted? There's sort of that whole experience too, where I'd imagine youth are looking for support if they're not necessarily finding it at home. Yeah,
it's huge. That's a huge piece to it. I'm often the first person sometimes that this student has come to open up and talk with. And so my approach has been and always will be, first listen and, come from a really non-judgmental approach and go at their pace and let them know how confidential I am, that I work within my licensure within the state of Michigan, that I'm a confidential person, and really share with them what that means, that if they come and talk to me about anything related to their gender, their sexual identity, it's not something that I'm going to call home to their parents about and share with their parents. Absolutely not. That is not my story to tell. That is their story. And so I'm just there to hear and listen and kind of go with where they want to go. And I think that's really impactful and that's huge. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from the students that I've worked with. And, the biggest thing too, when they do come to me and they come out and identify, a certain way. Let's say they use some kind of identity. They might say, hey, Mrs. Belke, I think I'm gay, and go on to tell me more. I always ask the student that I'm working with, what does that term or what does that identity mean to you? Because I really think it's different there's so many different identities now. And I think of it as like a beautiful swirly circle, right?
Right.
It's not a spectrum, but more that's just, the circle. And I want to hear from them, like, as you, as a person with this identity, tell me what that's like for you. So I start there, and then, I go off their lead. If there needs to, or they want to have parent involvement, I'll facilitate that communication, and sometimes even invite parents in or call from my office with the student there if they want to do that. But that's pretty rare. A lot of the time the student's parents already know. And unfortunately, the student is having a lot of conflict with their parents around it. And so I'm there just to kind of be continued support. And I try to advocate and offer, but I also try to that delicate dance, that balance of, what I may think, okay, I think at this point I should connect with your parent and really try to educate them and identify ways that the school can be more supportive for you and your family. It is really, really tricky when the family's not necessarily wanting that support or not really wanting to accept what's going on for their child.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about, wanting to understand what the students are talking about when they use some of these terms and identities, right?
Yeah.
Because they may use language and mean a different thing by it than what we assume they mean, or what we think that term would imply. Right. So really trying to understand what they understand about themselves. Let's see. What do I trying to figure out how to word this?
Well, I do want to just add. I do want to add something too. I think pronoun use is a big thing too. I think when I meet with students, I always will share with them my pronouns that I use and ask them for them to share their pronouns. I think pronouns are huge and really important, and showing the acceptance and the validation of this is who they are and this is their identity. So when I'm meeting with them, I will say, I'm Mrs. Belke, I use she, her, hers, and then I'll ask if the student's comfortable sharing what pronouns they use. And I always say use instead of prefer. I think that's sometimes a common language that providers might use is what kind of pronouns do you prefer to use? And in talking with students, it's been very clear that it's not a preference. This is who I am. And so to be mindful of that language when asking.
So I don't want to assume that all of my listeners have been in on this whole conversation about pronouns, right? Because I know what this means. And I'm thinking people are like, pronoun, like, what even is pronoun? Do I remember that from grammar? So you're saying it's a really important conversation to have with people, she, her, hers, would be the pronouns I use, that you use. What are some of the other choices, and what is the significance of, maybe asking your children this, for parents that are listening to the show?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So there's several, again, it kind of goes back to, there's so many different identities. There's many, many different gender pronouns. And I think, the way our society is and has been is it can be very binary, where we think about two boxes, a male box and a female box. And if you're in the male box, it's blue and it's he, and it's everything masculine, and female and she, and it's everything feminine. And that's just not the way the world is. That there are individuals who might change gender, or there are individuals who are gender nonconforming or don't identify with a gender at all. So there are gender neutral pronouns. So besides she, her, hers, and he, him, his, there's that they, them, and theirs. There's also other ones that individuals or folks might utilize as be, here, their. But again, I always I meet with where the student's at. And again, if they share with me that I prefer to use they, then I honor that. And I think, again, that's a huge way to respect an individual for who they are. And sometimes even, I'm a sexual health, expert, right? I'm a professional at this, and I sometimes will make a mistake. And I know that a lot of teachers, if we have a transgender student who is using pronouns, right, that are different from the pronouns that, align with their birth sex, teachers get really anxious about that. If they slip up and use the wrong pronouns, especially if maybe it's still within the school system, that individual might identify with their sex at birth, right? Not their transition sex, or gender. Right. So there's a lot of anxiety around that I see with teachers. And so I just educate teachers too on, if you make a mistake, not to make a big deal about it, just recognize that you made the mistake, correct yourself, and then work really hard to use the correct pronoun in the future.
Yeah, and I can get the significance of this to people as being seen and acknowledged and validated for who they are, and making that effort, even if we slip up occasionally or something, making that effort a long way towards making somebody feel accepted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how formed is sexual identity? At the school age, obviously there's a big range of age of people in school, but, are some of the youth, are they experimenting with some of this? Are they trying it on? Is it a phase? I'm imagining those are some of the questions that parents or teachers, might have about this development.
Yeah. So I come from the stance that, if this is what a student's telling me, then I honor that this is who they are. And I support them in wherever they're at as part of their identity. I think that pushback and that confusion from parents or teachers, is this just a phase or whatnot? I think that correlates back to we're brought up in the society where it's very binary, and this is what a male is, and this is what a female is. And so it's difficult, especially with the new generation that we have right now of youth. It's really shifted as far as just way more plethora of identities. And I think it's like 50% identify not as heterosexual. So there's this whole huge percentage now of youth that have different identities and names and ways of further expressing themselves, which is amazing to have the correct identity, and label for themselves.
Yeah, and I want to just point out that if somebody isn't heterosexual, that doesn't just mean, that means they're homosexual. There's a much wider variety of terms and identities now than a lot of us. Well, for me, I'm a baby boomer, right? For some of those old to understand, it's even that's not binary, right? There's language for certainly there's bisexual, but there's pansexual, and I can't remember the whole list, but there's a variety of ways people.
There's a huge variety, and again, it's ever changing, and it's not static, and it's so different and unique to every single person.
Right.
So that goes back to that importance of asking really, what does that mean for you? And I think when I'm working with youth and I'm working in a school setting or even in my private practice, I am constantly thinking about sexuality in 4 different main areas. And I think that's important to touch on for listeners too, because how I kind of, and my approach and how I think about sexuality, I think about it as one, you have like your sex, your biological sex at birth. The second part is sexual orientation. So who are you physically attracted to, emotionally attracted to? Then you have your gender identity. And when I work with teachers or youth, I talk about that being in your head. When you look at yourself in the mirror, who do you see yourself as a gender-bodied person.
Yeah.
And then you have gender expression. So the way in which individuals or folks, show their gender to the external world. And so I'd like to think about these 4 concepts, right, as working all at the same time, but they're all separate. And that's a really critical point to make, that they're not connected. So we can never assume, based on the way someone's expressing themselves in the world, that, oh, that must mean they're gay, or, oh, that must mean that she wants to be a boy because she's got super short hair, right?
Yeah.
So super important to distinguish that those 4 main concepts are very, very different from one another.
That is such a good point, because I think our human brains somehow feel more comfortable if these are all aligned. They all seem to go together in the way that
it makes sense, right?
And yet, we can't assume by how somebody dresses, how they, what their orientation is, or even how they think about their own gender.
Right.
Certainly can't assume what kind of biology, anatomy people have. I mean, we haven't talked about this specifically, but the whole concept of, intersex, or all the conditions that might make somebody even biologically not male or female, right? Like not so clear. Like all of these are very diverse categories.
And I will, even in educating teachers, especially, I have there's this wonderful handout that outlines this whole piece, and I've provided teachers with this handout and encouraged them to even put it up in their classrooms, so that we're also, one, recognizing that this is important and something that we think about in our classroom and is on our minds, and just also educate our students as well.
Well, I would love to get that from you, and we can put it in the show notes. In case the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So it's from Teaching Tolerance. It's great.
Okay. Hey, this is Jess. I'm just taking a quick break, and I want to make sure you know about the guide I wrote about how to talk to your partner about sexual concerns. This comes up a lot in my practice. People have struggles, and it takes them so long to bring it up with their partner. They're afraid that that conversation is going to go badly. Their partner's going to be upset. The partner's going to be defensive, or they just don't know how to talk about sex and sexual problems. Common problem. So I wrote this guide that really helps you address this. It helps you prepare for the conversation, how to introduce the conversation, and then tips about how to actually get through the conversation so that you can change things with your partner as a team. If you are interested in this guide, you can find it at bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Again, bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Happy to send it to you. So if parents are, or have youth where this is, I don't want to say an issue, but an experience that they're having, it seems to me super important that the parents are asking the kids, what does this language mean to you? What is your experience? Like, let me really understand exactly what's happening for you, right? And then asking to be another important part of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And get them support. Get them, if it's uncomfortable for a parent, and they want to be supportive, get the parent support and get the student support. There are wonderful clinicians out there who specialize in working with LGBTQ plus youth. And that is a huge component to all of this. And making sure that the student is in the driver's seat of picking their provider. I think that's something I really work hard to do, is I include the student in that referral process. Yeah. So I'll have the student in my office, and we'll be looking online at different mental health providers who I've kind of identified as a good fit given what they're presenting with and what they're looking for as far as support. And I'll have them look at their profile, read about them. We'll talk about what kind of insurance your family has and get them in the driver's seat, right? Picking out who they're going to be talking to, because therapy is not going to work and that support's not going to work if they don't feel connected to the person.
Right.
That's going to be a huge piece to it.
Right. So let's move on to the topic of schools. I mean, LGBTQ plus youth in school. Like, is there anything else you wanted to say about data about this? If you were talking about them not feeling safe, but
yeah, there is this wonderful survey that goes out that the CDC does, and they just came out with, so it's the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that the CDC does, and they look at youth across the United States. And the most recent one was from 2017, but their results for LGBTQ plus youth, shows that they're, more likely to be bullied, more likely to be in violent situations at school or in their life, higher risk for suicide, drug use, mental health concerns, missing school. So there's a lot of significant concerns, right, for our sexual minority gender youth. And one of the really neat things is the survey, for the first time, they just released in January of this year from that 2017 survey, that they put in one question for transgender youth, which was amazing. They had one question on that survey, but they were able to get from the survey and the research that 27% reported feeling unsafe at or going to or from school, and that 35% of transgender youth are being bullied at school, and 35% attempt suicide.
Oh my gosh.
So pretty high percentages there. So it's a concern, and it's definitely showing, the research is showing that these students are not feeling safe at school.
Right.
And just being in the educating field, working alongside educators, there's so much research out there that shows having an emotionally safe and supportive school learning environment is critical to student success.
Yeah, and this is, I would imagine, on top of them not necessarily feeling safe at home, and then, not really feeling safe in community, right? Like, right. This could be
where do you feel safe, right?
Yeah. So what? I mean, obviously, this seems like why it's important for schools to do something about this, but what can they do? Like,
right.
Are there
I think
practices sort of that?
Yeah. So there's definitely, I think with this most recent edition of actually having a question with transgender youth and having LGBTQ plus questions related to the survey, the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it's showing that this is on their minds. This is good. There's communication, and we're talking about it now. And so there has been some push and from CDC to go further and really try to explore how do we create safer school environments for these youth. Yeah. From my experience and from articles that I've read and what I've looked into, I think, at the individual level, just starting with me, right? That micro approach of the counselor, whoever, right. Whatever mental health support you have in the school, you're the front line.
Right.
Sometimes it's the teachers, and I'll get into that, but the counselor, that's huge. You have to be culturally aware and, mindful and trained in this area, because these youth may be coming to you, and you definitely want to make sure that your approach is spot on. I even just talk about how my office is very affirming and inclusive. I think that's a huge piece. I have a safe space sticker on the outside of my door. I have different pins that show my gay pride, and I have cool cranes that a student once made for me. That's actually the different pride flags. And they're hanging from the corner of my room. So I think on that micro level, that's that's huge with the counselor.
Yeah.
But some schools don't have counselors, and they're limited, in the United States. And so training for teachers and school staff.
Mm-hmm.
How can they create safe, supportive environments for all students in their classroom? I think that's a big starting point. Is something I did last year. I trained all the teachers for professional development, and I'm doing that actually this summer for another independent school in the area. They've asked me to come in, which is great, right? That this is on their minds and they want this. And so I'm going to be coming into another school this summer and doing a training with all the faculty and staff there and working with them on how can you create a safe classroom for students, how to be mindful of the language you use and mindful of not making assumptions with your students. Classroom management, if any kind of bullying behavior comes up out of this, how do you manage that in the classroom? So I think that's one thing, is training the school staff. And then also on the micro level with the counselor. Then I think the other piece is working with the school to create evidence-based policies and procedures and different activities within the school setting to really create a healthy environment for all youth, right? So we talked about the GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, having a support group like that within the school setting is critical and very, very important. And that's a way to directly impact the well-being of our LGBTQ plus youth. And then it's also, a tool for them to be within their school environment and create change within the environment. So that's something that the GSA that I'm involved in, they are constantly coming up with ideas and advocacy opportunities within the school setting to really create change. They mention all the time, they hear people in the hallways say, "That's so gay." Right? And they work with each other on how they can educate their peers. So that's something that they're working on. So policies, I think those are great. Anti-bullying policies too.
Right.
Having that all written down, right? So if something comes up, you can easily pull out that policy and say, we don't do this, and so this is the outcome for you going, behaving in a way that's against our policies and procedures.
Yeah.
I think too, just really working on the culture of a school, that comes up from administration and the student leadership individuals within the school to really create a culture in the school that's focused on respect of all individuals. No matter what culture, sexual identity, religion, that we respect everyone. And so I think that's a huge piece too. And another thing that I think would be helpful is curriculum. Looking at the curriculum in the school and making sure that it's inclusive.
Yeah.
And this came up for me because I actually did a little survey with the students in the GSA at my school. And I asked them, how can our school be more supportive? And that was a huge thing that came up is in our history class, I want to learn about famous, lesbian historians, or I want in my French class for my French teacher to not assume that when they're doing like role playing and they're speaking in French, to not assume that I'm wanting to go on a date with my boyfriend and how do I ask him to go to the movies with me? Right. So I think that's huge. And then in your health class, how do we make sure that we are providing education and resources for students of all identities within the health class as well?
Well, and I'm also thinking just about facilities, gender neutral bathrooms, or what do people do around PE class? And,
uniforms for the schools that have uniforms. How do we navigate that? That's something that's really difficult to navigate when you have uniforms where one is, very female. You wear a skirt,
right?
And a male is you wear the pants and the tie. So that's very binary, gender binary, versus just more of a gender neutral uniform.
Right. So I was sitting here thinking, you seem to work in a school that has taken this on and is willing, even though it might be a more conservative school, you're allowed to be in there advocating, working for some of these changes, supporting these youth. Do you have any tips for parents who maybe have youth like this who are, needing to go to bat for them in the school system, public or not? I mean, it just, these get to be kind of polarizing issues in some communities. Any thoughts for parents about how to best advocate for their children?
Yeah, I would say to start by coming and finding the counselor if you have one.
Okay.
It could be a really great process to create an alliance and connect and kind of brainstorm together, because every school is so unique, and even state to state, or even parts of states, right? It's all so different. And so I would say, try to find those safe people, and maybe the student has insight too, and unite with those safe people, and work together and talk through kind of what change you might want to create, and to not stop fighting. That it can be difficult at times, and it's been amazing to watch my GSA students just create this group, the safe space for them within the school, but to really work together and create change. Even if it's small, it's creating a ripple effect.
Right.
Think about like a stone in the water, and it creates these bigger ripples down the road. It's a unique perspective too for me, because this was a school where I went to growing up.
Oh, wow.
And there's no way back in the day when I was there, graduated in 2003, there's no way that there would ever have been a GSA.
Wow.
So that's been really neat to see, even just in those years, the change that's taken place. But I will say it's great to be able to have movement and be able to feel that support from administration and be able to do work like this with the students.
I would also imagine,
and it's rare.
When you're talking about evidence-based policies, and the fact that survey now has some data, that would also be something parents could research and arm themselves with, right? Data, science.
Yeah, absolutely.
That there's real risk to the population if people are not willing to provide a safer environment. Yeah,
and there are resources in some states. Again, I only know within the state of Michigan, but within the Department of Education, there is someone designated to LGBTQ plus youth concerns. And so that, and I've actually worked with that person, and they've been amazing, especially when it was my time to kind of start looking into transgender policies within our school. That person was a huge resource for me, and was through the Department of Education. So that might even be something to look into for a parent.
Right. Depending on, see what your state has to offer for that.
Or even if your student is working with a mental health provider in the community, connecting with that provider. And sometimes that provider is even willing to come into the school and educate administration or staff on why this is important.
Right. Well, thank you so much this was just a wealth of information. So thank you for sharing your
Good. You're welcome. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Great.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.